Alright, so we're going to do a little short video on changing an alternator on a 1994 Silverado. First thing you want to do is start with a charged battery. So if your battery's not charged, you want to charge that up before you do any testing. So I got my leads hooked to it. Right now we got 12.8 volts with the engine off, battery's resting. So that's what you want to see. You want to see between, I don't know, 12.4, 12.8, somewhere in that area. 12.6 I think is what they say is the optimum. So anyway, I charge this battery overnight. This is actually my truck. I've had this truck for over 20 years, I think 22, 23 years now. I'm not going to do a ton of testing on this because I know this truck inside and out, and I know it doesn't have a wiring problem. I know that it's just the alternator. My gauges aren't working on the inside, and you know, it's going dead. This truck actually, this alternator actually lives kind of a hard life because it's in the shop. And then when I pull other cars in, I pull this truck out, take it on short trips. It doesn't get a chance to really charge the battery. And this battery, I'll tell you what, it's a Duralast. I'm not a big AutoZone fan, but this battery's probably 6 years old, 7 years old. And this truck was in the body shop 2 years, getting new cab corners and getting it in the shape that it is now. It was actually in pretty good shape before it was there, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, it took longer than we thought to fix the body on this and make it right. So it's got all new metal on the cab corners. Bed's all been redone. It wasn't a ton of rust in this, but like all Chevys, have the typical cab corner rust. So anyway, this is my personal truck. I'm not going to do a ton of testing on this. If this was a customer's car or computer controlled alternator, I would do a lot more testing. I would go through that with you. But this is a pretty simple one. We got 12.8 volts with the engine off. And thankfully this is a 94 Silverado, so the alternator's right there. So this really is going to be about a 15-minute job. So the next test you want to do if you got an older truck like this is start the engine up and see what the voltage reads while the engine's running and the alternator's spinning. So we'll do that next. Alright, so the engine's running, alternator's spinning, and we got 12.2 volts on the meter. So it's not charging at all. So what you want to see, well, let me shut the engine off, it's kind of loud. So ideally what you'd want to see on this meter with the engine running, the alternator spinning, would be around 14 volts. You know, 13.5 to 15 volts is probably acceptable. If you're on the low end of 13.5 or so, then I don't know, you know, what I usually do is put a big load on it. I'll put the AC on, turn the headlights on and all that, and see, make sure it stays above 13.5. I really want to see about 13.8 to 14 volts, somewhere in that right neighborhood. Some cars more, some cars less. But good rule of thumb is between 13.5, which 13.5 is a little low. I'd like to see a little more than that, but 13.5 to say 15 volts, and your alternator is probably doing its job. So first thing we do on a job like this is anytime you take an alternator off or any kind of electrical work, you want to disconnect your negative on your battery. This is what I was saying about this battery was this battery sat around for 2 years in the body shop, off and on, maybe moved here and there. But this thing has went dead more than any battery I've ever seen in my life, and this came back and worked great after being dead several times. I mean, this truck doesn't get driven a whole lot, not as much as it should, and this battery's been a trooper, man. I don't know, it's been a great battery. I got lucky with it. So anyway, you take this tool, 5/16 or 8 millimeter on these GMs, take your negative battery cable off. You don't want to weld things that aren't supposed to be welded or below fusible lengths. Create more work for yourself. So always take the negative cable off before doing the alternator. And then down in here, like I said before, we got real lucky on the Chevy. The tensioner's right here, so we'll put a 16 millimeter socket on that, lift up on it, and pull this belt off. Alright, so like pretty much everything else on these 90 Chevy, well, early 90 Chevys. Everything's pretty easy to get to. So the tensioner is down in here. You just take a 16 millimeter socket, put it on there, take the tension off of it, and then pull your belt off. Like I said, this is a super easy one to get. You can't really get it easier than this. The next thing I like to do is take the electrical connections off the alternator before I take the actual alternator off the engine. So we'll tackle that next. Take off this. This is your main feed. Goes down to your starter, and then you have this pigtail here. So you pull this, pull that. That's all the electrical connections you have on these older alternators. All right, so there's 3 bolts you have to take off. One there, one right there, and one on the front. I don't know if you can see it. They're all pretty easy to get to, but of course GM like to be special, so they use 2 different size bolts to hold the same alternator on. Alright, so I took this one out, now we'll move to the front and get that one out, and that should be it. This thing should come out of here. Alright, you got this one right here in the front. Alright, so that's it. There's 3 bolts. The alternator's loose. Take this thing off. And what I like to do is take a soft hammer, hit this back, make this flush with this bracket. Makes the new alternator going in easier. And then once you put this bolt back in, it'll bring this back out to the alternator. It's basically just a spacer. But instead of fighting it, putting the new one in, just take a soft hammer, tap this back in all the way to the bracket. And like I said, when you put the new bolt back in, it'll move it back to where it's supposed to be. Makes it easier to get it out, get the new one in. Alright, so I got the new one set in there. Obviously it's just reverse of taking it off. I'll put these 3 bolts back in and hook the wires back up. One thing I will say about this while I'm thinking about it is these aren't really meant to charge your battery from dead. So you don't want to, you want to make sure your battery's charged before you put this alternator on, because these are just here really to maintain and charge your battery while it's running. It's not good for these alternators to keep charging your battery from a dead state. And that's part of the reason why this alternator went out, is because this truck sits so much, and the alternator's got to work twice as hard to keep that battery maintained. You know, if you drive your car a little more, it's easier on the alternator. Plus this truck takes a lot of short trips, which is another thing that's taxing on the alternator. But you know, they say they'll void your warranty if the battery's not charged when you put this on. I don't see how they would know either way, but it's just still a good practice to make sure your battery's fully charged before you put the new alternator on. Like I said before, you can jump it and then this thing will charge it if you drive it enough, but it's not good on the alternator. So just go ahead and charge it first before you put this on, then you're good to go. No worries. So we'll put these 3 bolts back in and go from there. The other thing I will add about this, if you don't do a lot of alternators or a lot of car work, you want to get all 3 of them in there and started before you just take. You don't want to put one in and tighten it down as tight as you can, because there's 3 different points that have to line up on this alternator. So and they can be off just a little bit, and it's a pain in the butt to get them out. So the best practice on almost anything that has multiple bolts is to start them all like I did here. Just start them all, make sure they're all lined up, run them in some threads, and then go ahead and run them down tight as you want, as tight as you know, tight. One, and run it all the way down. Again, I already have the other 2 started. And that right there, do a few more turns. That's factory spec right there. I looked it up, and the factory spec on that is whatever the Milwaukee can get on it, plus like another 90 degrees, just so you know. That's factory spec. And that's actually sarcasm if if you're not used to doing this job. And then we'll just go ahead and tighten the other two down. And we got the one in the front, and then it's all bolted back in. Alright. So the only thing left is the belt, the wires, and hook the battery back up. This is a regular pigtail, one wire. Snaps back in. Put the main cable back on. They usually give you a new nut with these. And we won't use a Milwaukee to put this on. Now this one here, you want to be gentle with, because you'll break the alternator if you don't. So this one here we'll just put on just snug. You don't want it loose, but you don't want it super tight. Alright, so this one I tightened up by hand. And like I said before, on this is the main one. You don't want to get crazy on this, because then you'll be making a trip back to the auto parts store and hoping that they'll replace it. Because this shaft goes inside the alternator, so you don't, and it's not the strongest thing in the world. Put your boot back on. Now the only thing left is to put this belt on. I only took it off from the alternator, so it should slip on pretty easy. Just use your 16mm with the long ratchet. On these, it's super easy. This is a super easy job, period. Pretty much anyone with a little bit of mechanical ability could change an alternator on these Chevy truck, these, you know, older Chevy trucks. So we'll put the belt back on, and then we'll put the battery back in, and then we'll read the voltage with it running and see how this alternator does. Alright, one other thing, I got the belt back on, I got the battery still hooked up. One other comment I want to make, because on the old alternator, you don't want to throw that away. Most auto parts stores charge a core. I know this is kind of basic stuff for someone that's a seasoned do-it-yourselfer mechanic, but these videos kind of aim towards someone that might want to try some of the stuff on their own. Anyway, when you go to buy the new one, they'll charge you a core charge. This one was $10. And what that is they charge you $10 up front. And then you take this back in the original box. They like to have the original box, and they give you that $10 back. So don't just throw this in the trash. Put it back in the box, take it back, and get your money back. So now we're ready to start the truck back up, hook our Vantage up to it, and see what kind of charging voltage we have now. Alright, so I got the old Chevy running. Alternator spinning. Go ahead and shut it off. Alright, so we're going to wrap this up. So you can see we had about 14.4 volts with the engine on, charging. So that's right at the sweet spot there. I'm happy with that. So, I mean, this, you know, like I said before, this is a very easy one to change. I could probably do this start to finish 10-15 minutes without if I wasn't filming it. Again, there's more checks you could do on this, and if this was a newer truck or one that the ECM went to the alternator and all that, then I would have done more checks. But this is a pretty simple, basic 2-wire alternator. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a, you know, fairly easy job, simple, and now the truck's good to go for hopefully another 10 or 15 years.